Let us begin our satsang today with a prayer. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So one of the topics we've been exploring since the last satsang session is about unveiling our true nature, the essence of our being, which is the mostly we are taking here the teachings from Vedanta, but also it relates to the teachings in yoga and other non-duality schools. What is the self we talk about? The self with the capital S, generally, which we talk about, is that essence of our true self, which is our true, innate, real, most essential nature, the one undivided consciousness, which we're talking about. So, the topic that we explored last time was on how, what are the pointers? How can we realize this? Because this is what we discussed as being beyond the mind, as not something that can be known directly through the mind. So one of the questions that we had last discussion was how the nature of mind, what is the nature of that mind, and how to use the mind to understand self, meaning consciousness, our true being. And this, of course, it's there in the Vedantic teaching, but in a much more simplified and direct way is what some teachers have endeavored to point out, such as Ramana Maharshi and all that, who said that the simple inquiry of who am I, inquiring into the nature of who am I, is a direct pointer for knowing ourselves. And in other prakriyas, we talk about Pancha Kosha Viveka, the 5 sheets or the 5 coverings. What are these 5 coverings? So the first is the body, the covering of the body. Second is Pranamaya Kosha, the covering of all our pranas, energies. The third is the covering of the mind, Manomaya Kosha. And also along with that is the intellect, Vijnanamaya Kosha. And then comes Anandamaya Kosha. Now, in reality, when we look at this, why all this is important is that self which we are talking about, the consciousness, the pure essence of our consciousness is beyond all these sheets, these 5 sheets. So when we understand these 5 sheets, we can step beyond that to the true essence of our being, the true consciousness. Now, we might wonder, what is the value, or why do we need to do it? What can I get out of it? What is the practical use of knowing the self or knowing consciousness? So here where we say that the most, when we talk about joys, what are we really looking for in the world? Like if you ask somebody, do you want to be enlightened? They say, I don't know what it means to be enlightened. But if you ask somebody, do you want to be happy? Almost everyone will invariably answer, yes, I want to be happy. And if you probe further, we also realize I just don't want happiness as like a thing that comes and goes. I want to be happy all the time. So if we look at the body, whatever we enjoy through our body, using our senses and using our physical body, whether we indulge in sweets, alcohol, drugs, or whatever joys we can get from the body, they're not permanent. So that kind of joy is no longer appealing to after you really reason and understand through this, that kind of joy is not appealing anymore. We want some better joy. Okay, then how about if I'm feeling good energetically, like some days we feel great energetically, some days we feel down energetically. So maybe that is the joy I want. But then also that kind of joy is comes and goes. based on the how the energy is working in the body. And even if you try to maintain the energy at very high level, the body is not designed for that. The energy will go up and down. So in fact, you want sometimes energy to go down, like especially when you want to go to sleep. Your energy is so high, you wouldn't be able to sleep, right? So that is also a hindrance. Now, when the joy that comes of all the joys we are seeking, we slowly realize, at one point, we realize that the mind and the intellect, if they're thinking too much, that is also the reason why we indulge in different things. Like, sometimes people watch entertainment or people take drugs. Why? Because the mind is not the source of happiness. You want to somehow disconnect the mind. So then, really, what is the state we can say we are enjoying happiness consciously every day? Is that state of deep sleep? You know. So that state of deep sleep is when we realize that there is a continuous joy all the time. For that state of deep sleep, for that period of deep sleep, there is joy. But that joy also is not there all the time. Why? Because when you wake up, that joy is gone. That joy of deep sleep is also gone when you wake up. Now, here is what we say, that when we are talking about the joy, there is a difference between the joy we experience through all these five coverings. So ultimately, what we call as Anandamaya Kosha, the bliss sheath. So most of us think that maybe what I'm really seeking is the joy that comes through this Anandamaya Kosha, the bliss sheath. But the joy of self, the joy of Atma, is pointed out in the teachings of Vedanta as even being beyond the joy of Anandamaya Kosha. The bliss sheath, which we call, the covering of the bliss body, that also doesn't give us the highest joy. Why? Because that joy in that is based on some object. And the joy there is also based on some sense of ignorance of who I truly am. So the joy of I get through anything. See, like if I have to enjoy some joy based on my individual entity, that joy is actually not the eternal joy that comes and goes. So this is why we need to seek the self. The first thing is, why are we exploring the nature of consciousness? Why do we need to understand consciousness? Is because the highest joy, the joy that doesn't come and go, that doesn't fade in and out, that joy that is the true essence of what we are seeking. In all other things, what we are seeking is this highest joy, Paramananda. And this is that joy of itself, the joy of consciousness. And in order to get this, what is required here? So there are two ways. One is the joy that the yogi gets. The yogi gets that kind of a long, an uninterrupted joy when he or she is in samadhi. So that state of samadhi is what we say is the state of highest joy, where that ignorance kind of falls away for a while. But that samadhi also, in one way, is explained as being a state. So, what is the real joy that we are seeking is that joy which is not based on any kind of a means. See, when we say that we want to be happy, what we are actually saying is that world in the world level, when we say we want to be happy, that happiness in the world has a opposite, which is sorrow or suffering. So the suffering, in order to diffuse the suffering, I want to be happy. So is that the kind of joy when we talk about the joy of the self? No, this is what the understanding comes from the scriptures. The joy of the self is not the kind of relative happiness that I'm happy because I don't have sorrow, or in relation to sorrow, I'm happy. No, this is that happiness which is even beyond that happiness and unhappiness. but commonly what we say is happiness and unhappiness is beyond that also. So this is what we are saying as the happiness of the self. Okay. Now here we come to one of the fundamental points, and the point is that how do we, the topic which we put out for this session is going beyond the mind. So in order to do this, what are we talking about when we talk about mind, and what do we say when we talk about consciousness? The question is, what is the difference between mind and consciousness?
So between mind and the consciousness, mind is something which we perceive through our senses in this whatever is we are experiencing through our senses.
Yeah.
So that is what is mind. Consciousness is an observer, or it is the sakshi to whatever the mind and this body is experiencing.
Hmm.
So the mind has a beginning and an ending. The consciousness does not have a beginning and an end.
Yeah, good. Yeah. So maybe before this, one thing we can try to understand when you said senses, like what are the functions of the mind? So maybe we'll just look at it. See, the one of the functions of the mind is it gathers information, right, through the senses, like all the what we call as Gnanendriya. All the senses, we are gathering information through that. Hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and all that. These are the information we are gathering. Then there is also what we call as the brain function, the coordination through the brain. The mind also controls our what we call the central nervous system. You know, the functioning of all our motor senses. Now, in all this, when we're talking about whether it's a brain or the mind, also has an ability, what we call as it can think, analyze, process information. You know, see, this is a function of it which we depend mostly. Like even like in order to talk and communicate and all that, this is what we are using. That functioning of that mind. So now the first point is like, and you mentioned about consciousness. How do we differentiate consciousness from the mind? What is that fundamental one process when we talk about consciousness, which is different from the mind? And here is where we can say that if my mind were just picking up information, processing it, thinking through it, and all that, then that aspect of that mind which is doing it can become just like a robotic information, right? It anybody can do it, anyone can do it, but what it also does is like when all this is happening, I get a sense that I am going through this experience, right? There is a sense of me being aware of this experience, right? That's that sense of just being aware of this. So now the question comes, is awareness a function of the mind, or is awareness a function of consciousness? So when we are aware of something, and if you say mind, then why mind? If we say consciousness, then why consciousness?
Awareness is belongs to the consciousness, and mind as four parts of the mano, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. So all these things are the objects, whereas the consciousness is the subject.
So for the awareness thing, like when we say somebody is not, let's say if somebody is not listening or somebody is not doing something, we tell them, can you pay attention? Hmm? Can you listen to me, or can you pay attention, or can you do this? Huh? So there, what do we say when we say attention? Is it the faculty of mind?
Yeah, it's a faculty of mind.
So that is a faculty of mind, right? Then how is that different from what we call as being aware?
So awareness stays all the time, where the mind it comes and goes in different states.
If it's awareness, it's consciousness. Huh? That's what.
Consciousness is aware of all the functions of the mind.
Consciousness is aware of all the functions of the mind. Okay, that's a good thing. Let me go with that. So if consciousness is aware of all the functions of the mind, then is that consciousness limited to just my mind?
And,
Is that consciousness beyond my mind and beyond all the minds? Because one of the topic we are exploring today is beyond the mind.
then it is a beyond the mind.
It is beyond the mind. So consciousness is beyond the mind, but it's aware of the mind, right? And can
Yeah.
mind be aware of consciousness?
Through mind only we have to go to the consciousness.
Okay, through mind we have to go through to consciousness. Okay. Okay, so let us just maybe first try to summarize this. See, the mind, what we are talking about, right? Mind we're talking about is mental processes, right? All these mental processes of thinking, hearing, listening, and it also includes processes such as controlling the nervous system, the brain function, and all that. The thinking, analyzing, processing, all that is part of the mind thing. Now, when we talk about consciousness, there are a couple of things. Consciousness is also that element through which we say the mind arises in consciousness. So the fundamental difference between mind and consciousness comes to this thing that which is aware, or that which makes the consciousness, that which is an expression of consciousness, meaning mind is an expression of consciousness, we say. And without the consciousness, the mind is not able to function. But in the other way also, that in order to know consciousness, we say we need the mind, right? Like we say, it is through, as you are mentioning, it is through the mind we realize consciousness or know consciousness. So how do we connect this is what we will try to just kind of look through. So the one of the first processes here is, like, there is a quote in the Bhagavad Gita which says, Uddharet atmanatmanam, natmanam avasadayet, atmaiva vyatmano bandhu, atmaiva ripuratmanaha. Elevate the self, or elevate yourself through the mind, and do not allow yourself to be degraded. Because the mind can be your best friend, and the mind can also be your enemy. So here we are saying the mind, if you don't use the mind properly, it can be your enemy. If you use it properly, it can be your friend. So the how do we use the mind is also very important. Now the same thing in one of the other Upanishad, Amrita Bindu Upanishad, it says, Manayeva Manushyanam Karanam Bandha Mokshaye. Mind is the cause for bondage. Mind is also the cause for liberation. So this now says, now it's an important thing. See, when we were doing the Pancha Kosha Viveka, the distinction between the body and consciousness is something that all of us will figure out at some point or the other. We realize that there is a sense of me, consciousness always there. But that sense of uh, uh, you know me being different from the body is something we all realize. Why? Because as we get older, we realize that young me and the old me there is constant me in there. So we realize that there is a consciousness which is separate from the body. But when it comes to mind and consciousness, it becomes difficult. What is the difficulty here is that we are not able to distinguish between the mind and consciousness. And here is where a yogi's approach is different, and a jnani, meaning one who comes on the path of knowledge, their path is different. But at the same time, the yogi, doing the yogi process also helps. But ultimately, what we talk about here is that viveka, that discernment. The ultimate discernment is the discernment between mind and consciousness. When we are able to differentiate mind from consciousness, that is when we are able to go beyond the mind.